What's that?
We'll give your opening statement first.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. The Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife will now come to order. The subcommittee's meeting today to hear testimony on 3 water-related bills. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at the hearing are limited to the chairman, the ranking member. This will allow us to hear from witnesses sooner and help keep members on schedule. So I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. So I want to welcome everyone for our first water hearing of 2020. We're here today to examine legislation that aims to tackle a variety of water management challenges, and I want to commend the bill's sponsors for their focus and attention on what are often difficult and thorny issues. Despite the challenging nature of these issues, I think it's imperative that we in Congress work to find collaborative, proactive, durable solutions for our nation's water management challenges. It's easy enough in Western water to simply propose things that pick winners and losers, that pit us against each other along party lines, regional lines, or among stakeholders. But if we want to solve problems, we have to do better. And that's especially true now as climate change increasingly threatens our nation's water supplies. To meet the challenges ahead, the subcommittee will continue to work in 2020 on producing and advancing federal water policies that promote future drought resiliency through forward-thinking, collaborative policy solutions. Federal water policy doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. We can build on the best ideas from everyone and improve the water supply picture for all stakeholders with policies that can endure beyond a swing in Congress or a change in an administration. Starting with the bills on today's agenda. 2020 is going to be a year where the subcommittee focuses on the development of federal water policy that promotes more resilient water infrastructure and more robust infrastructure investment in surface and groundwater storage, water reuse, desalination, efficiency, and conservation. We'll focus on the need for greater investment in watershed health to benefit and sustain fish, wildlife, and downstream communities. We owe this to the environment and to future generations. But when we do this, we also, by stabilizing the environment and recovering endangered species, can help improve water supply reliability. We'll work to advance research and development in the water sector and to expand the use of modern water management tools, data, and technologies. And we'll also work to improve federal support for numerous disadvantaged communities facing serious drinking water challenges, particularly in the arid West. The bills on today's agenda attempt to advance many of these objectives, starting with Representative Cox's H.R. 5347, otherwise known as the Disadvantaged Community Drinking Water Assistance Act. This bill will make new grants available to support projects and activities that will help supply clean drinking water to rural communities facing serious drinking water shortages. The bill specifically targets aid toward disadvantaged communities in the arid West, many of which have been left behind for years because existing federal drinking water programs have population caps and narrow eligibility criteria that exclude many of the communities who are most in need. Given the unique water supply challenges faced by communities in the arid West, the bill would also have the Bureau of Reclamation administer the program. Reclamation is the main federal water supply agency in the West. It has decades of experience working to help Western communities address difficult drinking water problems, including significant involvement in the development and construction of numerous tribal drinking water projects, work on emergency drought relief programs under the Reclamation States Emergency Drought Relief Act, and the administration of Reclamation's rural water projects. All of these things supply reliable drinking water for some rural communities across the West. But for too many communities, there simply aren't enough resources and support. They've gone without sufficient help and attention from Congress for years, so I want to commend Representative Cox for elevating the drinking water issues in his district here in the Congress and for making it a major focus of this committee's work for the first time in a very long time. Next on the agenda, we'll examine another bill from Mr. Cox, H.R. 5316, known as the Move Water Now Act. It authorizes $200 million in federal aid to repair water infrastructure that's been severely damaged by land subsidence. The most obvious candidate for this is the Bryant-Kern Canal. which is a major feature of the Central Valley project, and I can see why Representative Cox came up with this bill. The Kern Canal has been severely damaged by subsidence. It's reduced its carrying capacity by as much as 60% in some cases, and restoring that could improve water supply reliability and facilitate groundwater recharge in a critically overdrafted part of the San Joaquin Valley. It also authorizes an equivalent funding provision for the restoration goal of the San Joaquin River Restoration Settlement. It really is important that we support both of the co-equal goals in that settlement. A huge bipartisan victory not that long ago in this Congress and in a part of the world where we were able to bring conservationists, water users, farmers, federal and state agencies together in a collaborative solution. That's a good thing. Finally, we have H.R. 4891, also known as the Western Water Security Act, from Representative Torres Small of New Mexico. Welcome to the subcommittee. This bill aims to promote water conservation, desal, and improved water management approaches to benefit both water managers and ecosystems in New Mexico and other western states. One aspect of it is expanding the Bureau's Water Smart Water Efficiency and Energy Efficiency Grant Program. This provides cost-shared grants to upgrade our infrastructure so less water is wasted from leaks, evaporation, and other inefficiencies. Among other provisions, it expands emergency drought relief activities for states and Native American tribes, supports collaborative water research efforts with New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, and Mexico concerning shared water resources, and expands federal support for water desalination projects, particularly rural desal projects, which can really help address water shortages across New Mexico and other arid states. I look forward to a productive conversation today about each of these bills, and we'll now invite Ranking Member McClintock to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Although the West faces an ongoing water crisis, this water subcommittee has not held a hearing to address it since July of 2019. Equally disappointing is the fact that after 6 months of inactivity on the subject, the best the majority can offer is a hodgepodge of New Mexico earmarks and legislation that duplicates in California's Central Valley what the WIN Act of 2016 is already accomplishing, but which desperately needs to be reauthorized. H.R. 4891 by Ms. Torres Small breaches the beneficiary pays principle that assures that local water projects are paid by local users. In this case, it includes a multitude of handouts to benefit specific communities in New Mexico at others' expense. This is precisely the robbing St. Petersburg to pay St. Paul approach that the beneficiary pays principle protects us from. Worse, this bill makes the highly ineffective Water Smart program even worse by expanding its scope to non-water-related objectives. Water Smart is the dubious grab bag that subsidizes things like low-flow toilets and barren front yards in an attempt to reduce water consumption. In other words, it consumes dollars that could be increasing water supplies and instead uses them to manage the resulting water shortages. The changes in this bill expand the program to any nonprofit conservation organization, regardless if it has any direct connection to water delivery. Further, it would divert Water Smart grants to objectives such as benefiting proposed or listed species under ESA or increasing ecological resilience to climate change. More disappointing are the two bills by Mr. Cox. H.R. 5347 creates a new nationwide grant program under the Department of the Interior for disadvantaged communities that have experienced a significant decline in quality or quantity of drinking water. Well, we already have that program. It's called the Safe Drinking Water Act. It already authorizes the Environmental Protection Agency to award grants to states to assist underserved, small, and disadvantaged communities that are unable to finance activities needed to comply with the law. If the program is not working, we should either change it or scrap it, but not simply pile one bureaucracy on top of another. His other bill, H.R. 5316, purports to address the dire crisis afflicting California's Central Valley, which includes 4 of the 5 top agricultural producing counties in the United States. For many years, the Central Valley suffered from groundwater overdrafts. In response, and using the beneficiary pays principle, the federal government fronted the money for the Central Valley project to use surplus water in wet years in order to recharge the aquifers. The users of the water have since entirely paid off the federal construction loan for the full cost of that canal, and it worked. until so-called environmental laws beginning in the 1970s set in motion severe restrictions in the ability of the project to deliver water. The result, groundwater overdrafts returned and have now created significant subsidence, which in turn has further reduced the ability of the project to deliver water for replenishment. The aqueducts are largely gravity-fed, which means that just a little subsidence can dramatically reduce water flow. The WIN Act, passed with a bipartisan majority in both houses and signed by President Obama in 2016, addressed the need to re-engineer the aqueducts, for which $2.3 million has already been appropriated. Meanwhile, President Trump has brought some sanity to the abuse of biological opinions that caused the damage in the first place, as well as ordering critical updates to ESA, NEPA, and WOTUS. But the WIN Act will soon expire, and we're beginning to despair that the majority has any intention to reauthorize it so that this work can continue. Now, there are two ways to restore the capacity of the Bryant-Kern Canal. One is to ignore the work that's been done and earmark money for the repairs paid by taxpayers who get no benefit from the project. The other is to reauthorize the WIN Act so that the engineering work already underway can be completed and then proceed under the beneficiary pays principle, assuring that the project is ultimately paid for by the users of the water. We're now more than halfway through the 116th Congress. The Water Subcommittee has not held a single hearing on the Western water crisis since July of last year and has now brought forth 3 mice. The WIN Act expires next year, and the sooner we reauthorize it, the sooner we can see through to genuinely addressing the crisis that bad public policy has created in the Central Valley. And there is no substitute for completion of the Shasta Raise, the Sites, and Temperance Flat reservoirs, all of which would be moving forward today if the Democrats would get behind them. I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now begin our testimony, starting with the lead sponsors of the bills on the agenda today. We'll begin with Representative Torres Small of New Mexico, the lead sponsor of H.R. 4891, the Western Water Security Act of 2019. Representative Torres Small, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman. Thank you, Ranking Member McClintock, and the entire subcommittee. It's an honor to get to speak with you today on the Western Water Security Act of 2019, bipartisan legislation to help stabilize and improve water infrastructure in the western United States. I deeply appreciate that both of your opening remarks mentioned the challenges we face when it comes to water scarcity. Indeed, despite the brief reprieve we have in New Mexico, the droughts we are facing now are among the most severe in recorded history, and the continued diminished flows in the Colorado River and Rio Grande indicate that this is not a one-time occurrence. Indeed, climate change poses an existential threat to our way of life in New Mexico and the West. Now is the time for action and investment. These challenges are not new for the West. For decades, we have negotiated to ensure that all geographies and users have equitable access to water. I became a water attorney to be part of the challenging but meaningful decisions we face around water. As politics became increasingly partisan and progress is increasingly stunted, water remains a key area where Democrats, Republicans, independents, industry, agriculture, conservation groups, and Native American tribes can come together to reach a compromise that works for everyone. In 2012, when I was a field representative for Senator Tom Udall, I recognized that while progress was being made in individual projects, New Mexico wasn't using statewide collaboration to deal with these historic droughts. With this realization, I organized Senator Udall's first statewide conference, water conference, to bring stakeholders together to find the ideas everyone could agree on and pursue in a cooperative way. In the following years, Senator Udall was able to implement many of these consensus items through larger legislative packages, including reauthorizing and expanding the Emergency Drought Relief Act and restarting annual funding to the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program, which authorizes scientific research for aquifers that span the U.S.-Mexico border to manage these sensitive water resources. It's now time to implement the next generation of consensus water policies for the West. The Western Water Security Act of 2019 has its roots in that conference in 2012, updated and expanded to meet today's needs. This legislation reauthorizes and expands the Emergency Drought Relief Act to include entities that are engaged in collaborative processes to restore the environment, and it reauthorizes and expands the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program by increasing the numbers of aquifers Arizona can study. Based on conversations we had at the conference, we helped the Bureau of Reclamation begin a leasing program of water rights in the Middle Rio Grande. This bill would increase the flexibility to manage this program, including acquiring water rights to enhance wildlife and ecosystem restoration. This provision also calls for a plan to more efficiently provide a stable source of water for Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. Using the lessons we learned at the 2012 conference, this bill improves the popular Water Smart program by increasing funding from $480 million to $600 million, expanding eligibility to include environmental NGOs, and allowing for funds to be used for aquifer recharge infrastructure. The Western Water Security Act also puts local voices in front and center, recognizing their vital role in providing water infrastructure. For example, this legislation adds $65 million in funding for desalination and makes eligible projects from irrigation districts, water districts, and Native American tribes, setting aside $15 million and increasing the proportion of federal funding for rural desalination to help communities like mine access the water that is nearly but not quite within reach. Desalination can be a vital part of the water supply mix for the Southwest. For example, in my district, the water supply for the city of Alamogordo and Holloman Air Force Base was radically disrupted when the 2012 Little Bear Fire poured ash into the water supply. A new brackish desalination will help diversify their water supply. As well, this legislation reauthorizes the Rio Grande Pueblo irrigation infrastructure grants through fiscal year 2029, ensuring these communities can continue to build their economies, preserve cultural traditions, and maximize water conservation in the Rio Grande Basin. New Mexicans know that agua es vida, water is life. As the West continues to chart a new normal of drier years and more intense droughts, we must lay the groundwork for long-term adaptation strategies. Chairman Huffman and Ranking Member McClintock, thank you for your consideration of the Western Water Security Act of 2019, and I urge your support for this important legislation. I look forward to working with you on implementing these necessary policies for water in the West.
Thank you, Representative Torres Small. We appreciate it. We'll now hear from Representative Cox of California. He's the lead sponsor of H.R. 5316, the Move Water Now Act, and H.R. 5347, the Disadvantaged Community Drinking Water Assistance Act. Representative Cox, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman and Ranking Member McClintock, for convening this hearing today. I welcome the opportunity to comment on H.R. 5347, the Disadvantaged Community Drinking Water Assistance Act, and H.R. 5316, the Move Water Now Act. I represent the San Joaquin Valley, home to some of our nation's toughest water challenges, not of least is the availability and the quality of drinking water for hundreds of small, rural, and economically disadvantaged communities. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, nearly half of the state's failing water systems are located in the San Joaquin Valley. The Disadvantaged Community Drinking Water Assistance Act seeks to fix that. H.R. 5347 would create a grant program authorizing over $100 million for projects in western states located in income-qualified communities of less than 60,000 that bring clean drinking water up to federal standards. Existing programs at the USDA have population caps that leave out communities in my district. Take the city of Delano, which has already implemented several water rate increases to pay for contamination remediation. Unfortunately, Delano, at over 50,000 people, is too large to qualify USDA rural water programs, yet too small to receive priority for other federal programs. Programs at other agencies do not do enough to assist struggling communities in the arid western United States. My bill seeks to close these gaps. Reclamation, as the main water supply agency in the West, is most knowledgeable on western water supply challenges and should have a role in solving them. Other communities who qualify for rural programs do not have the resources to hire technical assistance to cover other grant application costs. Still, many small communities that can cobble together funding for a drinking water project still face an inability to pay for the ongoing operation and maintenance. In some cases, the most economical solution is to combine several small community water systems or connect a small system to a larger system to achieve economies of scale. H.R. 5347 recognizes these wide and various challenges by making these solutions eligible for grant funding proposed under this legislation. We sought input from local community-based organizations who are on the ground assisting disadvantaged communities. One of these organizations, the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, has joined us today to speak to these challenges faced by communities and how our bill seeks to address them. I want to thank committee members Chairman Huffman and Congressman Jim Costa and my fellow Valley colleague Josh Harder for their support in co-sponsoring this legislation. H.R. 5316, the Move Water Now Act. The Move Water Now Act would authorize $200 million for repair and conveyance facilities impacted by land subsidence and prioritizes facilities that have lost 50% of their carrying capacity. H.R. 5316 authorizes an equivalent amount for the restoration goal of the San Joaquin River settlement. Rather than heeding calls to send increasingly larger flows down the river channel, this funding would support projects that restore and enhance habitat for salmon without threatening water supply reliability for users of San Joaquin River water. The Friant Kern Canal runs 152 miles from the Friant Dam south to the Kern River, delivering surface water supply from the San Joaquin River to the east side of the San Joaquin Valley for potable uses and irrigation of over 1 million acres of farmland. Land subsidence impacts have reduced the canal's carrying capacity by 60%, with many of the most impacted farms and communities located in my district. This legislation would provide non-reimbursable funding for repairs for critical conveyance facilities like the Friant Kern. Restoring carrying capacity along the Friant Kern Canal will improve surface water deliveries and is important for groundwater recharge efforts. The region has had significant groundwater recharge potential, but it can only be fully realized if infrastructure exists to deliver water when available flows are in the system. Congress has already demonstrated its support for fixing the canal. In the December funding bill, Congress appropriated $2.3 million for a Friant Kern Canal feasibility study and for conveyance capacity correction projects. I'd like to thank Congressman Jim Costa, John Garamendi, and Josh Harder, as well as Natural Resources Committee Chairman Raul Grajava for their support in co-sponsoring this legislation. I look forward to seeing that Congress and the administration continue to support federal funding for these important facilities. In conclusion, thank you again for considering both pieces of legislation that would restore critical water conveyance infrastructure and bring clean drinking water to disadvantaged communities in California's Central Valley and the West. I look forward to continuing to work with members of the committee and with the Bureau of Reclamation on this legislation. Thank you. I'll yield.
Thank you, Representative Cox. We will now set up our second panel, the administration witness. Let me remind our witnesses that under committee rules, they should limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. For our witnesses, when you begin, the lights on the witness table will be green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light will come on, and the red light means that your time has expired and it's time to wrap up. So we welcome the administration's witness, Mr. Grayford Payne from the Bureau of Reclamation. Mr. Payne, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Huffman, Ranking Member McClintock, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Grayford Payne, Deputy Commissioner of Policy Administration and Budget for the Bureau of Reclamation within the Department of Interior. Thank you for the opportunity to provide Interior's view on H.R. 4891, the Western Water Security Act of 2019, H.R. 5316, the Move Water Now Act, and H.R. 5347, the Disadvantaged Community Drinking Water Assistance Act. The Western Water Security Act of 2019 authorizes funding for New Mexico and other states for research, technology, and infrastructure for future water needs. The bill also broadens the eligibility for WaterSmart grants, creates a new rural desalination program, and authorizes emergency drought funding. Eligibility for water management improvement grants under the Secure Water Act is limited to state, tribes, irrigation districts, water districts, or other organizations with water or power delivery authority. The bill expands the definition of eligibility applicants to state, regional, or local authorities that include organizations with water and power delivery authority as members. Additionally, the bill expands eligibility to include nonprofit conservation organizations. Currently, these organizations may partner with eligible applicants We're concerned that expanding eligibility to nonprofit conservation organizations could lead to confusion and unintended consequences. Finally, H.R. 4891 modifies existing authority for construction of desalination projects under the WIN Act. Rural desalination projects are eligible under the existing statute that we currently have. We would like to work with the sponsor and the committee on technical suggestions to clarify the language and address concerns we included in our written statements. In December, the Bureau of Reclamation released its proposal to restore capacity along part of the Frying Kern Canal. Reclamation is committed to repairing the infrastructure so that water deliveries can be optimized. However, subsistence is not unique to Kern County or to just California. The Move Water Now Act, introduced by Representative Cox, would authorize $200 million for the repair to eligible water conveyance projects in reclamation states. The three eligibility requirements listed in the bill include repair activities that are major non-reoccurring of the mission-critical asset, projects where a loss of 50% or more of designed capacity, carrying capacity along some portion of the facility has occurred, and the additional water made available through the project would be used primarily for groundwater recharge. The department supports the objective of addressing water conveyance constraints. We're concerned with the bill as written and would like to continue working with the committee and the sponsors to ensure it accomplishes its intended goals. The Disadvantaged Community Drinking Water Assistance Act establishes a grant program within Interior to assist communities experiencing a significant decline in the quality and quantity of drinking water. The department appreciates the intent of the H.R. 5347. Helping communities obtain safe drinking water is important. Several individual reclamation projects list drinking water as authorized purpose. The bill, however, as introduced, overlaps with the Environmental Protection Agency's existing Small Disadvantaged Community Drinking Water Grants Program and would be duplicative of their efforts. We're happy to work with the committee and sponsor to facilitate better coordination among agencies working to address drinking water problems. Reclamation and Interior recognizes the need for more reliable water supplies and quality drinking water. We would like to continue to work with the committee on the water supply goals of today's legislation. I'm glad to answer your questions. Some of the bill's language today relates to specific regional activities. So for some of your questions, I may need to respond in writing for the record after the hearing. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. We will now recognize members to ask their questions, and I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Payne, everywhere I go in California and around the West, I hear stories from water managers and others that are consistent with what we're going to hear from some of our witnesses today. We've had decades in some cases in some parts of the West of droughts and very dry conditions. And there seems to be a growing consensus that even though this is a term this administration doesn't like to use, climate change is actually driving our water challenges. And even the Bureau's own basin studies are projecting drier conditions that appear to be related to climate changes in many cases. So can you please just briefly explain whether many Western communities should be preparing for drier conditions in the coming years?
With my background as a CFO and the policy administrating budget offsite, I think I would rather get back to you on that with our science advisors.
All right. Well, you are the Deputy Commissioner of Policy, but I understand if discussing policy is somehow out of your comfort zone, we'll keep going. Let me ask you about Reclamation's efforts to support desalination research and water supply projects. I know Reclamation recently announced several desal funding awards to help pay for the development of improved and inexpensive ways to desalinate water. Commissioner Berman said that these awards were a direct result of the administration's commitment to improving the water supply through better technology. Can you expand on the administration's position here? How important is it for us to support desal and other new technologies so that we can prepare communities, especially in the arid West, for future drought conditions?
Well, currently, with the way this Water Smart program is structured, we already have a program that can address desal in rural communities. And so when we look at this, we see this is just a subcomponent of a bill that already exists that anybody could.
Okay, I wasn't asking you even about the bill. I was discussing the broader policy objectives, but that's okay. Let me ask you this. Has federally assisted research supported technological advancements in desal related to cost reduction, reduced energy consumption, and environmental mitigation?
I'm trying to understand.
So we're talking about these federal programs
Sure,
to support
correct.
desal. And you're a numbers guy, you're a finance guy,
Sure.
and you would want to see that return on investment. I'm just asking if these federally assisted research efforts have actually made progress in reducing cost and reducing energy consumption and environmental mitigation, or do we need to do more?
Well, I think at this stage, ocean desal is very expensive, and brackish water desal is very expensive. And I think as the further research we do, hopefully the dollars will go down, but I don't know where they would bottom out at and where you would just flat, where they would hit the bell-shaped curve and start reducing. That's a question that I would rather get back to you on the record, talking with our science advisors and our technical staff.
Well, one of our water managers today is going to testify how inland desal could really be an important way to bring new water supplies online in New Mexico. I know in California and other coastal states, ocean desal gets a lot of attention, but even in California, we have several inland and brackish groundwater desal plants that are playing very important regional water supply roles. Can you talk a little bit more about how inland desalination and the opportunities that presents are priorities for the Bureau?
Well, currently when we do inland water desal, what we're using it for is either recharging or using it for purple water and so forth. It's one of a suite of series of different things within our Water Smart program that our water districts can apply for, but it does complement some of our other programs.
Well, I thank you. I'll now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Payne, the chair mentioned climate change, and we have seen a great deal of climate change in California over the past decade. We went through 5 years of a near-record drought. We are now approaching the third year of enormous water surplus. During those drought years, we watched our reservoirs drained to near dead pool status. Had the drought gone on another year, entire cities would have simply run out of water. And then as the flood years began, we have had to release billions of gallons of water out of our reservoirs because we've got no place to store the surplus water for the next drought. So the first question I have is, what is in the West the most cost-effective way of storing water from wet years so we've got plenty in dry ones?
Right now, the most cost-effective way is what we currently have is our water storage.
Yeah, and in fact, the California Energy Commission conducted a study recently involving San Diego, which is at the end of our water pipelines. They report the most expensive way to produce water is desalinization at the cost of $2,300 per acre foot. Water recycling, $1,500. Imported water, $925 per acre foot. Groundwater storage, $737. Cheapest source of water in San Diego was surface water storage at $600 per acre foot. So the question that raises is what's better, abundance or scarcity?
Well, I will say that the 7 Western Basin states, they had 3 years worth of water supply that got them through with Lake Mead and Lake Powell. I'm not sure what the total storage for California is, but that did make a difference along with other suite of factors that we used.
I actually have those numbers here. The annual flow on the Colorado is about 14 million acre feet. On the Sacramento, it's about 25 million acre feet. So the Sacramento is far, far larger than the Colorado River. The reason we hear so much about the Colorado is we store 60 million acre feet on the Colorado. That's 4 years of flow, and only 11 million acre feet on the Sacramento. That's less than 6 months of flow, losing most of the rest to the Pacific Ocean. We were looking at the numbers just in terms of comparing raising Shasta Dam, as it has been held up for years and years by litigation, about $1.4 billion to do that. That would add another 630,000 acre feet to Shasta's storage capacity. The Carlsbad desal plant, which is often used as the example of success in desal, would cost about $1 billion. That produces 56,000 acre feet. But here's the thing. When we draw water out of Shasta, it generates enough electricity to supply 710,000 homes. When water is drawn out of Carlsbad, it consumes 1/4 megawatt for every acre foot of water it produces. In other words, Carlsbad consumes enough electricity to power 250 homes in order to produce enough water for one home. And yet, for some reason, the majority is putting our money into the most expensive possible ways of producing water rather than the cheapest ways. So once again, it raises the question, what's better, scarcity or abundance? That answer ought to be self-evident to every rational person. But getting to the concerns over the Friant-Kern Canal, how is that unfolding right now? Have we not already appropriated the engineering money to determine the feasibility of reconstruction of that canal?
So, regarding Friant-Kern, we're currently in the midst of doing a feasibility study in conjunction with the NEPA, and both those should be completed within 2020. That then will help us determine with the feasibility study what the cost.
Presumably, we would then be ready to proceed with financing and construction, correct?
Well, we're in the midst of completing the feasibility, and we've come up with some ideas about how we should do it. But the feasibility study will drive the level of financing for
And
share.
the financing is currently available through the beneficiary pays principle, right?
I'm assuming it is.
Yeah, and we would be departing from that radically by a grant program that simply, as I said, robs St. Petersburg to pay St. Paul.
Well, that's why we use our feasibility study to determine what is the federal cost share based on federal benefits versus non-federal benefits.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Cox for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Payne, with regard to the public benefit, does reclamation consider groundwater recharge, especially when it's beneficial to disadvantaged communities, a non-reimbursable public benefit?
I don't have the answer to that. I will get back to you on the record. I'll talk to the operations side of the house on how we deal with what we view groundwater recharge.
Yeah, naturally, that's a very, very important distinction there.
Sure, I appreciate it, yes.
Yeah. And then with regard to the WIN Act funding, in the Bureau of Reclamation's interpretation, does the money provided for canal repair have to be repaid? In other words, is it reimbursable to the federal government?
The feasibility study that we're in the midst of doing will determine the component of that is reimbursable to the federal government versus the component that is non-reimbursable. Non-reimbursable usually has to do with flood control, recreation, and environmental. So once those calculations are made later on during this year, we'll come up with an answer for what the reimbursability component will be.
Okay, and then finally, with regard to scarcity of resources, The intention of this bill is to bring more resources, more dollars, more investment into federal facilities, in addition to existing programs, particularly under WIN. Would this bill bring more federal dollars to this facility and free up money under WIN Act for other things such as storage?
With this current bill, the Frank Kern Canal bill, was what we're talking about, with the current language, the way it's written, you're saying, would it bring more money to this facility?
Yes.
Okay. But this is back to the feasibility study. But currently, as this bill is written, it's a very narrow bill as it's defined with its criteria of requiring 50% of capacity to be lost. And we view this bill as it doesn't work well with the rest of the 17 western states where we have subsidence issues that may be at 25% or 15%, and they couldn't even apply for this until they get to 50%. It would be kind of like you wait for the termites not just on the doorstep, but halfway through the house before we could even apply for this. So we'd like to work with the committee and the bill sponsors to work on this so that this current bill fits the needs for any issue canal where we have some level of subsidence so we can head it off before we get to this level.
Fair enough. So I guess what I'm hearing is that you'd actually like to see the bill expanded beyond what it's, as it's currently written, to be more encompassing.
Correct. It's just too narrow currently the way it is. It's very Frank Kern specific.
Well, we're looking at it because it was so critical, and it was probably the facility that's got the most, been most impacted over the recent drought and subsidence issues. I don't think there's any argument about that. It's something that needs to be, obviously, that's why you're looking at it. Are there any other feasibility studies going on subsidence issues with regard to any of the other federal canals or facilities?
Well, Delta and Mendota Canal, we're looking at right now, identified about a $5 million. But other than that, I've asked for more data on what other feasibility studies we're doing or other locations where we have possible subsidence. So I would have to get back to you on the record to give you more detailed of where it is, where we have these issues. But the
Great.
one that comes to mind is Delta Mendota Canal.
Great, thanks very much, and I'll yield the balance.
Thanks very much. The chair now recognizes Mr. Sablon for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing. And although I recognize that the focus of the legislations here are on the western states, I'm going to shift my focus further west into the northern Mariana Islands. Super Typhoon U2 struck my district, the northern Mariana Islands, in 2018, late 2018, and the storm was reported to be the most powerful, or the second most powerful, if not the most powerful storm in the United States since the 1930s. So nearly a year and a half later, we're still recovering. Such extreme weather events leave drinking water infrastructure quite vulnerable. But even before Super Typhoon U2, my district was the only congressional district without full access to clean, potable drinking water 24 hours a day in the entire nation. Now, thankfully, much progress has been made in the past decade, though we still can't drink water from the tap like other Americans. And you can actually use it to brush your teeth even. And of course, my constituents remain concerned about their access to clean drinking water. Mr. Payne, what is the reclamation doing through Water Smart or other programs to ensure that communities like mine have basic access to water?
Thank you for your question. Reclamation does offer grants to communities such as yours. We'd be happy to work with you to identify the
Have you ever issued grants to the Northern Marianas, Mr. Payne?
I'm sorry, say it again.
I
I don't believe we have, but I think we have a program that, and I'll get back to you on that, but we have a program that is available.
Okay, fair enough. Like, in your experience, what can the Northern Marianas and other areas vulnerable to extreme weather events that are becoming more frequent due to climate change? And I say this with all sincerity, growing up in a place where typhoons and storms occur every year. We're called Typhoon Alley for a reason. I've never seen a storm such as Typhoon U2. Then before that, we had Sodelor, we had Mangkut, we had U2, then Hagibis just was scraped, just moved past us when and did its forces do damage to Tokyo. But what can those places such as mine do to communicate our infrastructure needs to the federal government and receive the assistance we truly need?
You ask, what are the sources you could use to communicate your needs?
Yeah, how do we pass on our needs to agencies like yours or other agencies, sister agencies in the federal government?
We'd be willing to reach out with you guys. We have our International Affairs Office, as well as, I think we just went out to Marianas Islands recently, but we're willing to set up some dialogue.
You have an International Affairs Office, sir, did you say?
We have both International Affairs and that we work, I think we've just...
So the Northern Marianas is in the International Affairs Office?
No, it's not, but I'm just, overall, we have groups that go out.
To be honest.
I was going to ask the gentleman if he'd yield. The last time I checked, the Northern Marianas were part of the United States.
No, they are, but I'm just saying, it's the insular areas is what I meant.
Okay.
Insular
Your
affairs.
statement was a little troubling. I yield.
Yeah, I know. I could tell by the laughter. So.
Yeah, no, but another thing, let me just, and I'm running out of time, but you mentioned a word that HR 5347 seems to be duplicative, is the word you used, of other programs. And if you think it's so, that other programs that your agency is addressing, if you think it's so, why haven't you addressed what you think are duplicative that require someone in Congress to introduce a bill to address the problem finally and maybe once and for all? If you don't have time, I mean, my time's out, so maybe you should provide
Normally, we don't
us-
lobby Congress for our bills, but, I mean, the current bill we have is available for everybody to participate in. So that's why we're here to talk about this, what we feel is the duplicate.
Right, so maybe you should provide Congressman Cox with an answer
Will do.
as to why you would use the word duplicative on his bill. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, are you back?
Thank you, Mr. Spahn. The chair recognizes Ms. Napolitano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Payne, I kind of disagree with my colleague from the other side that California is already full of water. The southern part of it is still hurting. I understand the aquifers are not full yet. But that said, I know that there are different prices, and I understood some of the costs that were mentioned. I thought that recycled water was coming much to par with all other, like desal and many of the other efforts to clean water, which is part of my biggest concern. And I want to know if you believe that recycled water projects are the most effective solution to drought management in the West, and the states should start to refocus their investments towards recycled water.
Well, I think the Bureau feels that recycled water is just one of a number of suite of options that we have. It's important, and yes, it does provide a benefit, but there's a whole suite of programs that we have that do the same.
But is it not providing the best results?
I can't answer whether it's providing the best
Would you
results.
check it out and let
We will
this
check
committee
it
know?
out and provide you with detail.
I appreciate that. It's really important in the West. A lot of the states are now beginning to think of utilizing recycled water or recycling brackish water, which is less expensive to do. And I think that the Bureau needs to focus on what will help the West. And because of the climate change, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and we have to be prepared. I know my cities are very involved in recycling water and have established a lot of several plants, huge plants to be exact, to recycle water and put it back to use in the aquifers. And I trust that the Bureau will see that. I have a bill to increase recycled water from 50 million to 500 million because there are still some 400 million, I understood, over 400 million recycled water projects already congressionally approved that have not come to fruition. And I trust that the Bureau will pay attention to the fact that this is needed in the West in order to be prepared, especially in California, which we are a donor state. If we need to be able to keep that status, we need the recycled water to provide for agriculture, for industrial, commercial, but especially for drinking water. So I would trust that any support that you can give to that project would be forthcoming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back. I yield back to you.
Thank you. I thank the gentlelady. And Mr. Payne, I don't want to pick on you here, but I have listened as you, question after question, are declining to speak to the most basic policy details of programs of the Bureau, confusing subsistence with subsidence, on and on, not knowing that the Northern Marianas are actually part of the United States, or whether the Water Smart program applies to territories. It's not your fault. I'm sure that you are a great finance officer, but whoever decided to send you into this committee did a disservice to you and is doing a disservice to this committee. We get a lot of stonewalling from this administration when we ask them questions. This is just a different kind of stonewalling. So I hate to pick on you, sir. Again, I thank you for your service. I'm sure you provide a lot of expertise in the area of finance, but I hope you will convey to your colleagues up the chain at Interior that we need witnesses who actually understand the policies and the programs that we're trying to address here in this committee and trying to legislate on. It would help both Interior and the legislative process if that were better respected. With that, I will recognize Mr. Costa for 5 minutes.
Thank the chair. Mr. Payne, again, not to berate a point, but I want to make sure that I ask you questions in an area that you feel comfortable with or have dealt with. Just curious, how many years have you been with the department, the Bureau?
With the Bureau, I've been about 11 years with the Bureau.
Okay, so you've been through multiple administrations and dealing primarily with finance. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to go through some of the pieces of legislation here. I don't know how familiar you are with them, and if you're not, just let me know. The Torres small legislation on Water Security Act of 2019, under Section 102, and I do think desalinization programs do have a place, although obviously the further inland you are, the greater limitations but it defines rural areas as serving less than 40,000 people. We have some challenges under the federal definition in the law of how rural is defined. I've had problems with this for years because I represent a lot of counties over the years in San Joaquin Valley, of which I would tell you they're very rural, but yet under the federal definition, if a county has a city that has over 50,000 people in that county, then the county is no longer considered rural. And the 7 counties that I've represented over different times all have cities that have 50,000 or more. So is it your sense that under the population count, if this became law, would be subject to what definition under what is defined as rural? Do you know?
I assume it would, but it's back to what we were talking about earlier about just the rural water. You're talking about versus the rural water desal?
Yeah, well, sorry, I missed that. I had another meeting. But the point being, though, the definition is important because obviously if you don't, under the federal law, qualify as a rural area,
Correct.
then you're not allowed to participate in this funding.
I'm assuming that's correct, right?
Okay,
I'll get
well.
you a better answer when I get back.
All right, well, I want to make sure that whatever the answer is, that we're on the same page on that. On the area of disadvantaged communities for drinking water sources, and I heard a part of the discussion with our colleague about competing programs. I mean, the bottom line is whether we're talking about Mr. Cox's legislation, 5347, or other pieces of legislation, would you say as a fiscal analysis for the Bureau of Reclamation that when you think of the totality of projects that exist in western states that the Bureau has a responsibility for, that there's ever been a time in the 11 years that you've been there in which there's been sufficient funding to deal with the maintenance and rehabilitations under those projects that are under the auspices of federal responsibility?
Well, we do, the funding we get, we do the best with what we can.
Of course, and
course.
yeah. But the problem is that it seems to me when we look at projects that were developed and constructed over the last 50, 60 years, and they're older and more maintenance is required, certainly you're dependent in large part to Congress appropriating, authorizing, and then appropriating funds for these projects, right?
Correct.
It's not like you have a nest egg there of dollars that you're just gaining interest on, and so would it be accurate to say that there is more demand for these projects in terms of maintenance and rehabilitation to maintain their original capacity, as for example with the Bryant Kern Canal,
I'd say it's fair to
then you
say.
have dollars available?
I don't know if we have dollars available.
Well, you don't.
We
I mean,
don't.
I know that.
Well, we all know that, but yeah, we don't have
Huh?
reserve.
But I mean, the authorization, it seems to me, and I realize you're dependent upon the Congress, and I'll take fair responsibility. Congress, frankly, hasn't, I think, done what it should do in terms of the authorization and appropriation, and you can go through repeated Congresses that go back a decade or two when you look at our responsibility. But you don't have the money, right?
Correct.
Okay, so you're dependent upon us to figure this out, right?
Correct.
So you need the resources. Okay, my time's expired, but I think we've established that point.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Mr. Levin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Payne, I also wanted to ask about desalination, which has had a demonstrated impact in my district to provide diversity of water supply. Last year, I introduced the Desalination Development Act, which would also reauthorize funding for Reclamation's desalination grant program, because I'm committed to advancing solutions that help provide largely drought-proof water supplies for communities like those in my district. H.R. 4891 would incentivize funding for rural desalination projects serving communities under 40,000 people. So, Mr. Payne, my questions. Do you think rural desalination projects could help address water shortages facing some rural communities?
I think it could.
And do you think having a carve-out for rural desalination projects in Reclamation's existing desalination grant program would help some rural communities receive assistance that they may not otherwise get under the existing desalination program?
We currently do have a program, and I think that anybody can apply to the program, and it's based on criteria. If they satisfy the criteria, it's a very fair process, whether you're a large community or a rural community. So that's the current program basically is based on addressing the criteria.
Thank you for that, Mr. Payne. I also understand that Reclamation is working to support more innovative, efficient, and cost-effective desalination techniques through its Desalination and Water Purification Research Program. How could technological advancements in these areas improve water supply availability across the West?
I think technological advances could reduce, hopefully, the cost of the acre-foot of water and provide additional water for these areas. But I'd have to get back to you on the exact details when we talk to my operations side and the science side of the house on what projects they're looking towards that would help that.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I'd ask the ranking member for a unanimous consent to allow Mr. Ben Ray Lujan to sit at the dais with the committee. I object. Seeing no objection, it is so ordered. Mr. Payne, thank you. We'll let you get on with your day, and I will now introduce our third and final panel. Again, for this next panel, as you come forward, let me remind you that under our committee rules, your oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the light will be green. When you hit the 1 minute mark, it'll turn yellow, and when it turns red, it's time to wrap up. I'll allow the entire panel to testify before we bring it back to the members for questions. And our first witness is Mr. Jason Phillips, the CEO of Friant Water Authority in California. We will next hear from Ms. Caroline Farrell, who's the Executive Director of the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, an environmental justice organization in California's San Joaquin Valley. Next will be Mr. William Bordeaux, the Executive Vice President of Harris Farms in California. And our final witness will be Gary Esslinger, Treasurer Manager of the Elephant Butte Irrigation District in New Mexico. So welcome to all of our witnesses. Thank you for joining us. And the chair now recognizes Mr. Phillips for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Welcome. My name is Jason Phillips. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Friant Water Authority in California. The authority is a public agency formed under California law, in part to operate and maintain the Friant Kern Canal, a component of the Central Valley Project owned by the Bureau of Reclamation. I want to say thank you to Congressman Cox, Chairman Huffman, and Ranking Member McClintock for providing me the opportunity to speak about this bill today. My testimony will focus on the Friant Kern Canal and its relationship to the water imbalance in the San Joaquin Valley, and how H.R. 5316 will facilitate completion of urgent repairs to this federal facility. The Friant Kern Canal was constructed by the Bureau of Reclamation in the 1940s and carries water 152 miles south along the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains on the eastern edge of the San Joaquin Valley from Millerton Lake to its terminus at the Kern River 4 miles west of Bakersfield. The canal delivers water to nearly 15,000 farms on over 1 million acres of some of the most productive irrigated farmland in the world. The federal government retains ownership of the canal, and under a contract with Reclamation, the authority is responsible for all aspects of the canal's operation, maintenance, replacement, as well as all costs related to those activities. The Friant Division contractors have paid these costs and have also paid off the initial federal construction loan for the full cost of the canal and all of the Central Valley Project facilities that requires getting water to Friant. Since taking over the responsibility for O&M of the canal in 1986, the authority has taken an aggressively proactive approach to maintenance and repairs of the canal, and we are very proud of our track record. Unfortunately, groundwater overdraft in the valley has caused land elevations to drop dramatically. In some areas by more than a foot per year. This phenomenon, called subsidence, has caused a portion of the Friant Kern Canal to sink more than 3 feet just from 2013 through 2017, and since construction in the late 40s, 12 feet. The result of that is it's lost 60% of the design capacity, meaning less surface water is delivered to the farms and communities who rely on it, and therefore an increased reliance on groundwater. Current cost estimates are in the range of $350 to $500 million just to fix this problem. It's important to point out that the overpumping is mostly occurring from lands outside of the Friant Division, from areas who have not had access to surface water or have had their supplies reduced due to regulation. For context on why this is occurring, for over 100 years, the valley as a whole has relied on more groundwater than is replenished every year. And as a result, it's seen massive declines in its groundwater reserves. It is for this reason that projects such as the Friant Division were constructed to convey surface water in wetter years to help recharge groundwater basins for use in drier years. However, all of the projects envisioned by the state and federal governments to offset this deficit were not completed, and over the past 30 years, environmental regulations have redirected water away from the valley that would have otherwise been used for recharge. This has resulted in continued persistent overdraft condition in the valley, and water users have had to increase reliance on groundwater supplies to maintain economic viability for their communities, making an already bad situation worse. And until recently, California has not regulated groundwater uses, meaning there was no control for the overuse of groundwater and the impacts that it causes. Collectively, we estimate that these factors have led to an imbalance of 2.5 million acre-feet per year, and if left unaddressed, it will have severe economic hardships and drinking water problems for California's most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. The authority supports H.R. 5316, which, if passed and funded, would represent a significant step in helping to prevent some of the severe economic hardships and human sufferings that would be caused by the water imbalance. The $200 million in cost-share federal funding toward repairing the water conveyance facilities of Reclamation's transferred works that have lost more than 50% of their conveyance capacity, such as the Friant-Kern Canal. It would also require cost-share by a non-federal sponsor, and we are working diligently on that to find the local and state funding. Attached to the testimony are informal brochures on the Friant-Kern Canal subsidence and an effort called the Water Blueprint for the San Joaquin Valley for the hearing record. I want to thank you again for the subcommittee's support of H.R. 5316 and for the opportunity to provide our perspective on thoughts on this critical topic. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Ms. Farrell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Huff, Ranking Member McClintock, Representative Cox, and subcommittee members for giving me the opportunity to testify on the Disadvantaged Communities Drinking Water Assistance Act. Over the last 20 years, I've assisted low-income, predominantly farm worker communities in the San Joaquin Valley access safe, clean, and affordable drinking water. I'm the executive director of and attorney with the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment. CRPE is a 30-year-old environmental justice nonprofit. Water is a concern to many of the communities we work with in Kings, Kern, and Tulare counties, and we work with organizations throughout the San Joaquin Valley on safe and affordable drinking water issues. Over our 30-year history, CRPE has helped small, unincorporated communities connect to municipal water systems in Shafter. We've trained water board members in Lamont and Allensworth on their governance responsibilities. We've assisted residents in water districts in Arvin and Alpaw secure funds for new drinking water wells to meet drinking water standards. We've also represented residents in Delano in challenging significant water rate increases for water they cannot drink. Throughout our work, we have observed that valley cities and unincorporated communities face several similar challenges into securing safe, clean, and affordable drinking water. Issues with water quality, water quantity, and affordability due to high costs and small pool of users. Water quality, in terms of water quality issues, several small water systems in the valley are out of compliance with drinking water standards for naturally occurring arsenic and nitrates from agricultural sources and septic tanks. Most recently, 1,2,3-TCP, trichloropropane, which was an ingredient in a commonly used fumigant, has been found to exceed drinking water standards in small city and small rural community water systems. San Joaquin Valley communities face drinking water quality challenges during the recent drought. Public and private wells ran dry, particularly on the east side of the valley. In the short term, residents needed bottled water, temporary water tanks, and portable showers. And in the long term, they needed viable water water solutions such as consolidation or treatment or drilling new wells. This raised also affordability questions. Water affordability is typically measured as a percentage of median income ranging from 1.5 to 3%. Residents in Delano regularly pay more than 5% of their annual income from tap water that they cannot drink. And studies have shown that residents in the valley can pay up to 10% of their salary for access to drinking water, often in the form of bottled water or water from the tap, or a combination of both. H.R. 5347 does several things to address the ongoing water challenges communities face. The bill applies to both public and private water systems. The San Joaquin Valley has a patchwork of governance models, from domestic wells to small nonprofit mutual water companies to municipal public water systems to agricultural irrigation districts to private wells. All face similar contamination, quantity, and affordability issues. Distinctions often seem unnecessary and prevent cross-jurisdictional solutions. Focusing on small water systems and communities with populations under 60,000 is very important. Small water systems are at a competitive disadvantage to larger systems. They do not have the same economies of scale, and they often do not have full-time professional staff or grant writers to complete applications. H.R. 5347 also allows for funds to be used on a range of water solutions. This range provides flexibility and allows the funds to respond to a variety of needs all at play in the region. Allowing funds to be used to fund costs related to application for additional funding is very important. Often water districts are required to undertake feasibility studies prior to receiving a grant or loan from another program. Water districts may forego the opportunity because they struggle to meet these upfront costs. This is an important gap in current programs. The bill allows for funds to be used for operation and maintenance as well as capital costs. This is crucial for small water systems, which often do not have reserve funds to remedy unexpected repairs. And the bill recognizes the relationship between affordability and treatment options, which is very important. Thank you for attention to this important issue and for considering our views on the bill. We look forward to working with you as you move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Farrell. Committee now recognizes Mr. Bordeaux for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Huffman and Ranking Member McClintock. I appreciate you allowing me to participate in this hearing. I was raised in a family that took public service very seriously. When I was, before I was 18 years old, I joined the Marine Corps. Both my grandparents are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. My grandmother was in charge of the infectious disease ward in the South Pacific, and my grandfather earned the Distinguished Service Cross on the beaches of Okinawa. And so I appreciate you allowing me to try to find solutions for the challenges of our generation. And I do think that the Bryant-Curtin Canal is an issue, and it needs to be addressed, and our drinking water issues are very serious. But I feel like we need to address the underlying issues that are causing the problems. Why do we have subsidence? Well, in the early days, when they first started farming in the San Joaquin Valley, when my grandfather was a child, he would tell me, driving from Coalinga to Fresno, it was mostly tumbleweeds and alkali. And pioneering individuals came before us, converted it into some of the most productive farmland in the world. And they were doing it through drilling wells. Learn from the technology that the oil drillers were using in the local community. And so they started farming, and they were very successful, but they started overdrafting the aquifer. And so they came up with bold solutions, and they built the reservoirs, and they built the infrastructure, they put in the aqueducts, they put in the Central Valley Project, they put in the State Water Project, and it solved the problem, or nearly solved the problem. But now, as we start restricting our water supplies, the problems have arisen. And I think we're restricting them for valid reasons. We want to improve the environment. We want to solve a myriad of issues. But unfortunately, though we're not improving the environment, the populations of the smelt and the salmon are dwindling. Our farms are being taken out of production. I think we can do better. And so we need to work together to find solutions when it comes to clean drinking water. I understand the importance of it. I lived in Kalinga in 1982 and we had a devastating earthquake. I lived in a FEMA camp in a tent for many months. And the communities rallied behind us and the beer companies bottled water and provided it for us. And so I understand that we need clean, safe, affordable drinking water. Later in life, as a Kalinga City Council member, I ran the water treatment facility, and during the drought, we restricted our water usage. We went down to 2 days of watering outdoors, and a lot of people's front yards went out of, they went dry. And we did cut back, and we were successful. Unfortunately, our allocation the next year was based on a percentage of historical usage, so we were punished for conserving. And then on top of that, you're trying to treat water that is in the stagnant water in the canal, makes it even more difficult to treat. And if you're not selling water, you don't have the resources to hire quality people to be able to treat the water. And so there's a myriad of issues. Now, when it comes to the biological opinions and the challenges that we face there, I think we need to move forward. We need to learn. We need to use adaptive management plans. We need to help the environment so we can free up water so we can put it to beneficial use. And I'm really willing to work with anyone to try to come up with those solutions. And when we cut off, our farming operation is very conservative. We farm about 10,000 acres on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley, and we only farm a third of that in permanent crops. And so we can fallow that land as allocations or water supply dwindle. We can take our row crops and we can adjust. But if we have a zero allocation, it's very hard to manage. And there's human suffering. There are people that are put out of work. The economy dwindles. It's not just on the farm, it's the people that do business with us. And it's difficult. We have people that I work with, my colleagues. They were initially migrant farm workers. They came to this country that wanted to pursue their dreams. And they went to work for our company and raised up among the ranks, and they manage a very large farming operations now. Their children went to UCLA. They're living the American dream. But if we have a zero allocation, there is nothing we can do. I mean, we've looked for solutions. We've invested in water banks. We've done everything we can to try to manage around a very difficult situation. But I think we need to come together in a bipartisan fashion and solve the challenges of this day. I sincerely hope that you reauthorize all reclamation provisions in the WIN Act, and I appreciate your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bordeaux. The chair now recognizes Mr. Esslinger for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman Hoffman and Ranking Member McClintock and subcommittee members, thank you for giving Elephant Butte Irrigation District the opportunity to testify on the Western Water Security Act of 2019, H.R. 4891. My name is Gary Esslinger, and I'm the treasurer manager of the district located in Las Cruces, New Mexico. For over 100 years, the Rio Grande Project has existed. And within the past 40 years, EventID has acquired the title transfer and ownership of the canals, laterals, and drains in our district. Agriculture has always been and continues to be the largest economic sector in south central New Mexico. It's not only the economic giant in our area, it's a way of life. The ag products grown off these family farms benefit the entire nation and are known for pecans, a variety of vegetables, and of course our famous green hatch chili. In addition to delivering river water to EventID, we also play an integral role in delivering of surface water to downstream users in the West Texas area and to Mexico under the 1906 treaty. Our water infrastructure allowed agriculture in the Rincon and Mesilla valleys to flourish, but it, like infrastructure throughout the nation, is aging and would benefit from additional investment to address the needs of today and in the future. Drought is not new to our area, which we have had to deal with for centuries. During the droughts of the 50s, it was determined that groundwater could be relied upon to continue the way of life without complete dependence on snowpack runoff. However, our region is now experiencing drastically reduced surface water supplies, declining groundwater and quality, in quantity and the cumulative effects of more than a decade of drought conditions. Compared to a two-edged sword, persistent drought cuts off the Rio Grande flow on one side, and litigation slices and divides the water resources and the way of life on the other. Currently, the United States Supreme Court action known as Texas v. New Mexico has divided our region. The case focuses primarily on the impact of groundwater pumping on the surface water deliveries within the Rio Grande project. H.R. 4891 sheds light on this division, and EventID is advancing many projects found in subsection 103.3, such as stormwater management, aquifer recharge, and other conservation measures to work towards a settlement solution. It has been recognized that pumping groundwater negatively impacts the available surface water supply because the two sources of water are hydrologically connected to the Rio Grande. However, in a drought, groundwater pumping overrules for quality of life. H.R. 4891 will help to create opportunities for water managers across the West to stimulate investments in aging infrastructure, advance water conservation, and keep depletions of our water supplies balanced through collaboration and partnerships. Our district has already developed a policy intended to reduce the depletion of surface water through groundwater pumping. We call the policy DROP. DROP stands for Depletion Reduction Offset Program. Under DROP, groundwater users will be able to offset their depletions by entering into voluntary fallowing agreements with farmers on a willing seller basis to curtail surface water use. The effect of DROP will be to overall decrease groundwater depletions because we are keenly aware that our farmers are both surface and groundwater users, meaning they are caught in the crossfire of this litigation with Texas and New Mexico. This litigation should not be solved solely on the backs of the American farmers, particularly when it is not just ag communities that have created the problem of depleting the aquifer. Simply put, there is no more cheap water. We all have to reach for our wallets. H.R. 4891, specifically sections 103 and 202, could be key to obtaining funding that is needed to complete development of key programs such as DROP. Finally, H.R. 4891 specifically targets desal of brackish water. Section 102 refers to a project EventID has supported and partnered with in New Mexico Water Resource Institute and New Mexico State. Studies of the feasibility of inland desal of brackish groundwater with no impacts to the Rio Grande is a regional approach to a long-term new water supply. Evidence of large volumes of brackish groundwater in the southwestern part of Mesilla-Bolson aquifer have been explored. Development and funding provided in H.R. 4899 will provide the major infrastructure needed to create this new water supply. Again, thank you for your work on this issue and for the opportunity to provide my comments. I look forward to working with this committee and its members as this legislation moves forward.
Thank you, Mr. Essinger. We'll now bring it back to the committee for questions, recognizing each member for 5 minutes, and I'll start with myself. Mr. Bordeaux, I want to thank you for your service and your family for your service. As we talk about Mr. Cox's bill, though, the challenges that you outlined with wildly varying allocations from the Central Valley Project, that's because you're in a different unit of the CVP, right? You farm in the Westlands Water District. This bill on the Friant Kern Canal is in the Friant unit of the CVP. So I just want to clarify that. We could probably have a long conversation about the variable allocations and other issues that you identified, but over in the Friant unit, it's a little bit of a different set of factors in play. And I want to ask Mr. Phillips about that because one of the few clear answers we got from our administration witness was in response to, I believe, the ranking member's question about this feasibility money that has been made available under the WIN Act. And on the issue of reimbursability, he identified 3 criteria that would potentially make it non-reimbursable. I think it was recreation, environment, and flood control, none of which appear to be directly relevant to the work on the Friant Kern Canal. So if I were running the Friant Water Authority and I heard that, I I think I would likely assume that that's going to be reimbursable. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, in our work with reclamation, and we work with them on the feasibility study, there are flood control benefits, there are ecosystem benefits that I can get into a little bit, but the large majority of it would be seen by reclamation as irrigation supply and
Best case, it's not clear that this would be
at the best case, it's not clear.
non-reimbursable. And how about the rest of the cost? Because this is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars, and we've just got a little bit of money for feasibility study. Is there anything that has been identified or allocated that would help you address those additional costs, short of a bill like what Mr. Cox has put on the table?
The short answer is no, but for the San Joaquin River settlement that was signed and authorized in 2009, that does provide a little bit, but at the time, the estimate was $25 million to fully restore the capacity of the canal.
All right, so you need something like what Mr. Cox has put forward, fair to say?
It would be very helpful and I think equitable.
All right. Thanks. Ms. Farrell, in your testimony, you talked about how water quantity issues exist in the communities that you work in, even when there is no drought. You've talked about how in some cases this is carried on for decades, including in historically wet years. And you have been at the forefront doing great work on serving these communities. But I want to ask you about Congress and the federal government. How do you rate our performance in stepping up and solving problems for some of these critically disadvantaged communities you serve?
Well, I'm happy that this is a priority this year. And I think, historically, the communities that we've worked with have been in existence for decades and have struggled with water quality for decades. So I think additional federal funding, I think including looking at the definitions of small water systems and small communities and rural communities is very important because a lot of them are excluded for practical reasons as well as just not having the resources to do the upfront studies and feasibility requirements for some of the programs that exist.
Is it important that drinking water relief grants be available for both public and private water systems?
Yes, I think so. There are many private water systems in the valley, private wells that serve one family, maybe two families that don't qualify as a small drinking water system, and they meet the same issues that other systems have.
So that's just the patchwork of drinking water systems in the San Joaquin Valley. Now, what about the size criteria limitations on existing grant programs? We have heard some reference to existing programs and sort of, we got this, EPA is doing this, existing programs do that. But there are caps that seem to be rather arbitrary. And you could either be too small to qualify for some programs or too big to qualify for others. Can you just speak to that, please?
Yes, I work in the city of Delano, which is a city of 50,000 people that doesn't qualify for many of the rural programs that are needed to meet its drinking water standards.
Big or too small?
It fails for nitrates and chloroform and other contaminants, and now 123 TCP. And they're going to need funding programs to help with that. The population that lives there cannot afford to have another rate increase to deal with the water contamination issues.
And Mr. Cox's bill would address those gaps?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bordeaux, you pointed out that the Friant Canal was supposed to solve the subsidence problem when it was in the Central Valley. It was constructed in the 1930s. Did it solve the subsidence problem?
Well, when surface water deliveries are restricted and people have to resort to groundwater,
I'm talking about, did the canal fix the problem initially?
And I was referencing the total infrastructure, not specific just the Friant Kern Canal, but I do believe it has. I do believe bringing surface deliveries into the valley are the best way to solve subsidence problems, absolutely.
And then the next question is, well, what happened? If it solved the problem, what happened?
Well, we've been restricted. Our surface deliveries have been restricted, and so farmers have had to resort to using groundwater and overdrafting it, causing subsidence and resulting in the issue that we need to spend this money to fix the Friant Current Canal. And I want to try to address the underlying issue.
Appreciate that. Mr. Phillips, do you agree?
Largely, yes. After the Bryant Kern Canal was built and the San Luis unit was built on the west side, Reclamation had determined that without further projects like the Mid-Valley Canal, the Peripheral Canal, Auburn Dam, and several others, there would be 1 million acre-feet or more overdraft in the valley. And now it's at about 2.5 because it's a combination of projects that were never fully constructed and about another 1 million acre-feet that has been redirected for environmental purposes.
And the Kern County, the Bryant Canal was constructed under the beneficiary pays principle, right? The federal government fronted the money, and then the users paid back the cost of the canal. Is that correct?
It was reimbursed fully by the Bryant contractors, yes.
So federal taxpayers ended up not paying a dime for that canal. It was all paid for by the users of the water. What's wrong with that model today? I mean, I realize you'd rather have free money, but what's wrong with that beneficiary pays
The
principle?
situation we're dealing with here, Congressman McClintock, is that we have a canal that's been fully paid by the Bryant contractors. All of the operation and maintenance has been done and paid for by the Bryant contractors. We now have a situation where it's impacted not by the Bryant contractors, and we have a set of beneficiaries that is much broader than just the Bryant contractors in the San Joaquin Valley. The overdraft affects communities.
But again, under the beneficiary pays principle, more beneficiaries, more people to pay back the cost of the project. That's the way that we've traditionally financed these things until we turn the federal treasury into a grab bag for local projects. But let me go on. How important are the 2019 BIOPS for the Central Valley?
The 2019 BIOPS will be very important for the Central Valley.
Can you elaborate a little bit? In what way would they be?
It takes advantage of the last 10 years of science by Department of Interior and Commerce and other science by the state of California, and updates the criteria in which the Delta operates.
Mr. Bordeaux, do you agree?
I'm sorry.
How important are the BIOPS for the 2019 BIOPS?
Oh, the biological opinions are the largest issue that we face. And it's not only for the farmers, it's for the environment. I think that we need to have a delta that has a vibrant population of smelt and salmon, and the biological opinions that we're operating under currently did not achieve that.
Okay, we're expecting the Democrats tomorrow to advance a bill on the floor to invalidate President Trump's ESA regulations. How would that affect the Valley?
Well, I think we need to move forward and improve, and I think we need to work together. This is an issue that should be bipartisan. I think that there's common ground, and there's more issues that we can agree on than disagree on.
But what would be the effect of that invalidation?
If the new biological opinions went into effect, then we would have real-time management. We could actually use science to determine when the pump should be throttled back.
Do you agree with that?
Which part of it?
On the effect of invalidating President Trump's ESA regulation reforms?
I'm not ready to talk about that today.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. What's your district's position on the reauthorization of the WIN Act?
We would very much support reauthorization of the WIN
How
Act.
important is that to your district?
It's very important, particularly if the biological opinions are not put into place in terms of the flexibility.
Mr. Bordeaux, what's your view of that?
I think it's critical, and I'd also like to add with the coming Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, if we're going to restrict our surface deliveries and restrict our groundwater management, we're going to have a coming catastrophe.
Thank you.
All right, the chair now recognizes Representative Cox for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. Mr. Phillips, I think many members assume that repairing the Bryant Kern Canal only benefits farmers. Can you elaborate on the benefits to the communities who rely on delivery of water along the canal for their drinking and municipal purposes?
Sure, and I can understand that, as most of the Bryant district is irrigated farmland, but I think, again, the reason the project was put in place was to benefit the broader groundwater aquifer that's used by much more than the Bryant Kern Canal contractors. In fact, there's about 50 small communities, many of which are very disadvantaged, that rely on that groundwater, and so water that is brought in by the Bryant Kern Canal to the contractors is very beneficial for communities that rely, in fact, many of them solely on groundwater.
Right, and I guess if you could just talk more about this federal nexus between the canal and why a federal share in the canal fix is justified.
Well, it is a federal project, and the impact to this federal project is not caused by the Friant contractors, who we do business with on this. But I also think that there's a nexus to the obligations under the San Joaquin River Settlement Act in a couple of ways. One, if the analysis that we've done is that if this problem is left unchecked, it's going to impact every aspect of operating Friant, including the ability to have flows in a timely way down the river. Also, the impact would be to the revenues generated by the Friant contractors that help fund that settlement.
And then my Move Water Now Act is going to provide this funding. And can you discuss a bit how this funding is in place of funding that's otherwise not available?
Well, the funding, there is, like I answered a question earlier, there really hasn't been a good funding source identified for this type of situation. I mean, Reclamation is working with us on the WIN Act to try and make those monies available. They do have authorities for operation, maintenance, extraordinary projects that may or may not apply to this, but there's no funding in that either. So this would provide a mechanism by which, if there were appropriations, would be directly applicable to this problem.
Yeah, that certainly is the intent. And so, you know, it's important that all the organizations, the contractors that are working together on how to best fund the non-federal share of the canal, and certainly it's what I want to help in that effort. And Friant makes up about half the ratepayers, and I just want to make sure that we can commit, and you can commit to providing that all landowners who are going to be asked to fund the efforts are going to have an equal voice in that process so we can ensure the best outcome.
We are certainly committed to hearing the voices of all Friant-Kern canal-paying contractors, not all of which are voting members of Friant Water Authority. I think you mentioned half, but I mean, there's about 80%, 75 to 80% are voting members of Friant Water Authority. But regardless of that, we give every Friant contractor a seat at the table before we take any vote on matters, and we would be committed to continue to do that.
Yeah, thanks very much. Ms. Farrell, you've touched on it, but you know, we know, I've visited so many of the communities out there and talked to so many stakeholders that the existing programs that just aren't available to them. They don't have the technical assistance, they don't have the personnel to be able to apply for some of these programs, or where they do, they're not qualified. We see that over and over and again. And so if you could just reiterate and maybe comment again about the programs that are not meeting the needs of these communities, what's the need, and what's being missed by the current programs?
Well, I think one of the things that this bill does that's sort of missing in other programs is it provides a multitude of projects that are eligible. Everything from the short-term kind of bottled water distribution, to operation and maintenance, to capital costs. And many of those costs are not included in other programs, or they don't meet the size requirements of those programs. And having the opportunity to address many of these things along like the life cycle of the problem of water in the valley is really important. And I will just give an example of a community in Lanier. This is not a project that we worked on, but Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability worked on, where community residents were able to get an arsenic water treatment plant built. They went through all of the application process, they did the feasibility study, and then it had to shut down 6 months later because they couldn't meet operation and maintenance costs. It was just too expensive for the small community. So having a program that deals with both the capital as well as the operation and maintenance is really important to provide real-world solutions to communities.
That's why the bill was drafted, so thanks very much.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Ms. Gonzalez-Colon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you are all probably aware, WaterSmart grants are currently available to water power deliveries authorities in the 17 western states, including also Alaska, Hawaii, and all U.S. territories except Puerto Rico. So I'm going to be, and I expect to work with my colleagues here in this committee to ensure Puerto Rico is eligible for this program, and I'm going to be introducing legislation to address this in the next days. But Mr. Bordeaux, one of the issues that the chairman brought was the limitations or the caps between the program in the EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act and the one that is going to be created in this program, in the HR 5347, in terms of the new grant within the Department of Interior to assist disadvantaged communities' access to drinking water. What should be the main difference between those two separate programs, the one in EPA and the one that we are creating in this bill?
We're asking me this
Yes,
question?
sir.
Well, I'm not really well versed in this, but I think the EPA is more well suited to deal with drinking water quality issues than the Department of Interior. Other than that, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
The reason I ask you is when I read your statement, it looks to me that you mentioned it may be duplicative work of the EPA and the one that is creating here.
They just seem better suited to address the issue. And I felt like there's underlying issues that are causing the problem that maybe the Department of Interior should be dealing with and focusing on maybe our water supply reliability. And in the grant funding, I think the EPA is working on that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And with that, I'll use back the rest of the time to Mr. McClintock.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Phillips, getting back to the repairs on the Kern Canal, $2.3 million has already been appropriated for this, for the purpose of doing the feasibility studies. Where are we in that, in that process?
Yes, 2.3 out of the WIN Act for feasibility, and the feasibility report is completed in draft form and being reviewed between Department of Interior and OMB currently.
Okay, and then what happens?
Then OMB determines whether it agrees, and the President and the administration will determine whether it's a feasible project and how the costs would be allocated according to feasibility standards.
Right, and again, you favor this bill because it basically gives you the money. But you know, as I said, in the past, we financed these projects through the beneficiary pays principle. We loan you the money, and then you pay it back so that we can then loan it to the next community to assist with their capital projects paid for by their beneficiaries. And we have programs to do that. The Bureau of Reclamation's Extraordinary Maintenance Program, for example. Have you looked at the possibility of utilizing those funds?
We have and probably will need to. Even with this bill, it would require, at a $500 million cost, it still would require $300 million to be paid for by a non-federal source. Right now, that would be Friant. Our issue is that there is a lot broader of a beneficiary pool than just Friant for this fix. If we had caused the damage, I would agree with you 100%. Or if it was ordinary, even extraordinary maintenance. But in this case, it is not.
Okay, now you say you have not caused the damage. Elaborate on that for a moment.
The damage caused is by overdraft and groundwater pumping, almost entirely by areas outside of those served by the Friant
But
Division.
again, I thought the Friant Canal was supposed to solve that problem.
And largely it has in areas that are served by the Friant.
Until what happened?
Well, it's a combination of things.
Have you seen a reduction in the amount of water conveyed through that canal over the years because of federal regulations?
Because of regulations, yes, and settlement,
Mr.
combination
Bordeaux,
of those.
do you agree?
Yes, sir, I agree.
Let me ask you, Mr. Bordeaux, what impact do you expect the state groundwater regulations to have on Central Valley agriculture?
Could you repeat that?
Actually, let me go to one final question because I'm almost out of time. Let me just ask you this. What would happen to Central Valley agriculture if you had to rely on desalinization?
It would be devastated. I don't think we could do that kind of volume of water that's needed, and I think the cost would be excessive. And so I don't think you should be sending fresh water to the ocean and spending up a whole bunch of money to take the salt back out of it.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Costa for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Jason, the cost benefits, I think, have been discussed here, but I think we need to look at it in its totality. When the federal government authorized and appropriated money for the construction of the Franklin Canal in 1951, it cost $61 million, okay? 1951, $61 million. You have paid for it and reimbursed the federal government. How much of the capacity has been limited now since the subsidence issues?
At the most constricted point, we're only able to deliver 40% of the design capacity.
Okay, and this is the problem we're trying to fix. And I think this is illustrative of projects throughout the West. I mean, historically, that many of them that were built after World War II, the 50s and the 60s, and we just have not provided the side of maintenance to maintain the reliability of these projects. So when we look at the economic and employment areas, and I think that a lot of the cause has dealt with trying to provide a balance for groundwater recharge in the service area for Friant water users, but we have areas outside of the Friant water users that have caused, in part, the subsidence and impacted the continuing overdraft of the groundwater. Is that not the case?
Yes, recent studies have shown between 80 to 90% of the subsidence is entirely from outside of the Friant Division.
And those are not members of your service area, the Friant
Correct.
Water District. So the economic and unemployment impacts that have been looking on both the east side and the west side, if we don't fix some of these problems with the groundwater law, while controversial and difficult to comply with, if we don't look at the totality of that and try to comply with it, it akins to what my parents told me a long time ago, Jim, you can't continue to go to the bank and make withdrawals from your bank account if you don't make deposits. And is that not the crux of this challenge?
Absolutely.
So what are the economic and unemployment impacts, do you think, socially for communities? You said 30, I mean, from Parlier to Orange Cove to Reedley, down to all the way to Exeter and beyond. Big and small communities that will be impacted.
So when the groundwater law is enforced, which is starting this year within California, and the need to reduce water pumping by 2.5 million acre-feet a year. Recent studies have just been coming out that shows nearly 80,000 permanent jobs will be lost in the San Joaquin Valley.
All right. There are other impacts, and we'll want to share them with the committee at a later date. On the transfer of title, because we look at multiple costs, there's never going to be enough money to pay for between $300 and $500 million to do the total fix. So the state is looking at providing some efforts. Senator Hurtado has looked at trying to move that effort forward. But the Contra Costa Water District, we transferred the title of their canal over to them to allow the water district to, in fact, borrow against it as a means to try to provide additional funding. Is that something that the Friant Kern water users would consider?
We are considering that, yes.
Okay, I think we need to consider that as a fallback. I'm running out of time here. Mr. Farrell, I think you did a terrific job of explaining something that I've been working on for years on small communities, and I applaud Congressman Cox's efforts to provide funding for that. One size doesn't fit all. They're private, they're public. Some of them aren't even cities, as you know. You mentioned Lanier. I remember when we worked so hard to get that opened up, and then after 6 months, couldn't pay for the continued operation. I got $1 million for Alpa years ago when I was in state legislature. It was getting its water from an irrigation district. All of these things don't fit easily in nice little boxes. What I'm really concerned about, and I think you did a great job of describing it, and Governor Newsom has stepped up to the plate last year, providing up to $300 million of state funding to try to address these drinking water qualities for these communities that deserve, absolutely deserve that kind of water. Are you trying to prioritize? Because this is the difficult thing on how we figure out how we address these issues with your group.
Prioritize
The needs. We're triaging. We're in an emergency room facility.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I think
I know it's difficult. Are you attempting to do it?
we are definitely attempting to
We
do
need
it.
that information. Finally, Mr. Boudreau, I support the biological opinions in place. They've gone through 2 administrations and hundreds of millions of dollars, as well as the reauthorization of the WIND Act. We got a lot of work ahead of us, and thank you for your testimony. Obviously, my time's expired, but we need to work together in this subcommittee to try to resolve water problems in the valley and in the western states, because they are similar, and they have been challenges that have existed for years, not just yesterday or tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Mr. Levin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Esslinger, I wanted to go back to the desalination portion of H.R. 4891. I have my own bill, the Desalination Development Act, to help provide a more drought-proof supply for communities like those in my district in Southern California. I understand that brackish groundwater resources are being explored as an option for reliable water supplies by some rural communities in New Mexico. Can you describe the rural communities in your state that this bill could help provide water supply certainty to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, in our area, we have many colonias. These are unincorporated towns, very poor villages, Anapra, Sunland Park, La Union. They get their waters through mutual domestic companies, and certainly as those straws are in this Rio Grande Valley, they're depleting the aquifer as well. So we found a source of brackish water of close to 50 million acre-feet out on the West Mesa that could service these colonias in these small towns. Unfortunately, you know, the fact is that where it's located, we will have to put in a well field, we'll have to put in a desal plant, and these small communities can't afford that. So we're looking for this bill to help fund that opportunity for these rural communities. Otherwise, they're going to be in the same fix that our cities, our farmers, and everybody else is. We're continually to bleed the Rio Grande dry. And we need to find another new source of water that can supplement and possibly be an alternative source. And this brackish water is not that brackish that it couldn't be desaled, put through a desalinization plant cheaper than you would ocean water. Right across 45 miles away from this location where we're thinking is the largest inland desal plant in the nation, and that's in El Paso. It pumps 27 million gallons a day of highly saline water out of the ground and provides drinking water for El Paso. So we think this is a doable project. It just needs funds.
Thank you for that. Ms. Farrell, I appreciated your testimony on the communities you work with in California. And specifically, I'm pleased that my friend Representative Cox's legislation is helping to bring the stories of your important work to this committee. Can you tell us more about what the lack of clean drinking water means for the community health and economic development in the San Joaquin Valley and across California?
Well, as was mentioned earlier, I mean, water is life, and I think in California, the state has recognized the human right to water, and it's necessary just in terms of health of people, health of plants, health of the economy, and as we're seeing people struggling with meeting their water bills for water they can't drink, they're also paying for bottled water, vended water. It's putting a strain on people's sort of pocketbooks. It's putting a strain on cities in terms of having to raise rates, and also in terms of just having relationships with their communities. It often puts local public decision makers at odds with community members who are angry about having to pay more water. It's creating like a lack of kind of civic unity around more bipartisan solutions to water quality issues. And I think it's having a real impact on just people's health in terms of having to deal with both air quality and water quality issues in their communities. It's causing illnesses from water, from bacteria in the water, and forcing people to buy vended water or bottled water. So it's having a real impact on people's day-to-day lives. and whether or not they can drink the water both at home and at school. This is often happening at schools as well.
Thank you very much for that, and I appreciate the chairman's leadership as we move forward. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Mr. Neguse for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman, for your leadership and for hosting this hearing. Our nation's water infrastructure is especially critical, of course, as we're talking about today, to those of us in the western United States, like myself, and for states like Colorado. Access to stable and secure water is quite literally a lifeline for communities out west and in my district. Their economies, health, and security depend on it. And of course, striking the right balance between conserving, sharing, and using our water resources depends on strong funding for the federal programs that provide water data, research, and infrastructure, which is why I think today's hearing is so important as we consider the 3 bills before the committee. In particular, H.R. 4891, the Western Water Security Act of 2019, introduced by my colleague, Representative Torres Small, in my view, would ensure that many key water programs for districts such as my own are provided strong federal support. And of course, as climate change continues to threaten water availability to millions of Americans, it's more important than ever to support these key programs supporting America's families, businesses, and farms. Colorado, as you all know, is the headwater state, with 7 of its 8 major river basins originating in our boundaries and flowing out to our neighbors. And 2 of those basins happen to be in my district. I'm proud that we were able to, earlier this year, advance legislation that directly benefit 2 of those rivers, both of which have been signed into law. The Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan Authorization Act, thanks to Chairman Grijalva's leadership, and the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program Extension Act, which I was proud to lead before its passage and signature by the President in December. I want to just ask you a question, Mr. Esslinger, because it's particularly helpful to have you here today as a water manager, and particularly on a river that originates in my home state, which you discussed in your exchange with Mr. Levin, the Rio Grande. In Colorado, we know that climate change is likely to make drought more frequent and severe across the West, and I wonder if you could just expound in greater detail on how H.R. 4891, in your view, will help make sure that water managers like yourself can take the appropriate steps to prepare for an increasingly unreliable water supply.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, thank you. We're blessed in our district that we have the largest reservoir in New Mexico, the Elephant Butte Reservoir, storage of over 2 million acre feet when it's full. Right now, it's probably got about 500,000 in it. And so certainly I believe that in my tenure as manager, I've watched that level decrease over time. And what we do within our district, and something that I believe that we need to focus on, is watershed management. We talk about storage, but if we manage and clean up our forests, we can do wonders with holding water up, slowing it down so that you don't have a flood on your hands. In my area, it's high plains desert, so we don't deal with forest fires, we deal with sediment. And certainly that is a huge contributor to blocking our rivers and making it inefficient to even deliver to our downstream users. So my goal is to try to improve the technology out there so we have rain gauges, weather stations way out on our irrigation watersheds that give me an idea of what kind of storm is coming to the valley. And then I can cut off the gates at Caballo and receive that stormwater and begin to capture it and use that water to recharge aquifers. So our technology is there, however, funding is not there, and we need to improve those watersheds.
Thank you, Mr. Esslinger, and I appreciate your touching on the technology needs, which of course the funding stream that we can create would certainly help in that regard. I want to yield the rest of my time to my colleague from California, Mr. Cox, and thank him for his leadership, particularly around H.R. 5347, his focus on disadvantaged communities, which I think have gone neglected for so long.
Well, thank you so much for yielding, Congressman Neguse. Mr. Bordeaux, you touched on it a couple times in your testimony today, and I'd like for you just to elaborate about the need to come together, both parties, all stakeholders, with a group, a plan for the San Joaquin Valley water for not 10 years from now or 20, but 100 years from now. And there is that effort in the San Joaquin Valley blueprint. And if you'd like to elaborate on that, we'd love to hear your comments.
Well, I appreciate that opportunity, and I do think water impacts everybody, all Americans, and not just the western states. The food that's produced in the San Joaquin Valley is consumed across the whole United States. And there are things that can divide us, but I think there's more things that we can find that will bring us together, particularly in my community. I don't think people differentiate themselves as I'm a Democrat or Republican, but they all will say that they need a vibrant domestic water supply capability. And so, yes, we can work together. I would love to work with you to try to solve some of our challenges, because they're big challenges, and they don't happen in election cycles. These are long-term challenges that need to transcend administrations and congressmen and women and things like that. And so, yes, we need bipartisan support to help the environment and make sure humans can achieve progress.
That's a good note to end on, so I want to thank the gentleman. Thanks to all of the witnesses for your testimony and to the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for our witnesses, and we will ask them to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following this hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for to allow for your responses. If there's no further business before the committee, without objection, we stand adjourned.